People talk about their VO2 Max score like it's the holy grail of endurance performance. I've said it before, people compare their VO2 Max to effectively their 1RM bench press or squat. But what actually is a good VO2 Max score? Well, in this video, I'm going to give you a chance, hopefully, to brag about your VO2 Max score, and we'll give you some information as to where you sit in the grand scheme of the general population. So let's get stuck into it. G'day and welcome back to the Trikes Performance channel. My name is Rob and I enjoy reading, running and raw English muffins. If you get any value out of today's video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It would really mean a lot. Also go check out some of the content from Damo and Sean. They're doing plenty, especially on the shorts as well. So go check that out. But let's get stuck in today's video where we're going to talk about what a good VO2 Max score actually is. Alright, firstly, let's define what VO2 Max actually is. So I know this is boring and it's just as exciting as watching paint dry, but unfortunately we have to cover it off. It's sort of like we have to sign a waiver before you go on a roller coaster. Anyway, I'll read it out because this is how boring it is. So VO2 Max is the maximum amount of oxygen that can be taken up, transported, and utilized by the body during 1 minute of exercise, or in 1 minute of exercise, actually, I should say. So there's a pretty boring definition I've wrote on my notes there. Essentially, VO2 Max, the V in VO2 Max refers to the volume of oxygen, whilst the max obviously refers to the maximum amount of that volume. So it's pretty technical stuff. But where does VO2 Max actually come from? So where do we get this value of VO2 Max? So VO2 Max is the product of cardiac output and VO2 diff. So simply put, I'll put this in some layman's terms. Cardiac output refers to how much blood is being pumped out of the heart per minute. And cardiac output is also the product of the heart rate and stroke volume as well. So just to put that little equation in there. And then VO2 diff represents how much oxygen is being extracted from the blood by the muscles during exercise. So you'll see with cardiac output, I should say, that there's an increase in that with exercise. And then there's also an increase in the amount of oxygen that's getting extracted by the muscles during exercise as well. So the equation looks a bit scary for VO2 Max, but when we break it down, as you can see, it's not as bad as probably what a calculus class would be. So how does that translate to our VO2 Max score then, and how do we get our VO2 Max score off this? Well, firstly, we also need to talk about a few different factors that contribute to your VO2 Max score, because it's pretty important. I know it's pretty boring as well, but there are a lot of different factors that will impact upon your VO2 Max score. So the first factor is age. So age is a pretty common factor that when we look across a range of different physical variables, particularly when you're an athlete. So we know that the younger you are, the higher your potential for a VO2 Max. And I say potential there because obviously if you don't train, then it's not going to be as high as what a 30-year-old would be. However, aerobic athletes can peak well into their 30s as well. So generally you'd see a peak in athletic performance between 20 and 30, but we know with aerobic capacity that you can still get some decent performance as well into your 30s, and with consistent training you can sort of mitigate that drop off as well. So it's not the be all and end all if you're like me getting towards the latter stages of your 20s. There is still some light at the end of the tunnel, but obviously as we know with aging, your VO2 Max will decrease. But again, if you can regularly train, then you can definitely make some improvements and slow that drop off in your VO2 Max as well, which is pretty important. The next one is gender or sex, whatever you like to call it. Now, we know males do generally have a higher VO2 Max than females. However, that being said, there's absolutely no reason why a female who is dedicated and consistent to her training can absolutely wipe the floor with some of us males as well. So generally, physiology would say males have an advantage there, but with training and dedication, women can definitely towel up the males. So the next one is training status. So this is an obvious one, of course. The more trained you are and the more training you've done, then the greater your VO2 Max, or the greater for a potentially higher VO2 Max. So what you'll see with beginners, you might see a greater improvement faster compared to a more experienced campaigner who's obviously done the hard yards over the journey. So they're probably closer to a genetic limit, if that's what you want to call it. Similar to hypertrophy training, when you're a beginner, if you're just hitting the weights for the first time, you'll see your greatest gains or levels of gains in that beginning phase. So similar to that. And lastly, the sport played. So obviously, which sport you play will have a great effect on your VO2 Max. So sports that require power base, such as 100-meter athletes, on the track, they don't necessarily need to have a high VO2 max for obvious reasons, because their event goes from anywhere between 9 and 12 seconds. So there's not that reliance upon the aerobic energy system. So when we think of higher VO2 max athletes, we obviously think of marathons, triathlons, cross-country skiing, road cycling, Tour de France, cyclists along those lines. And those events are long and prolonged, so they need a greater reliance upon aerobic energy system. So if you tend to be a bit more of a plotter like myself in running, then you probably want to aim to have a higher VO2 max than someone who's a 100-meter athlete who's obviously just on the track for about 12 seconds. So the greater the reliance upon the aerobic energy system in your sport, the greater the need for a VO2 max. I'd say that's a good rule of thumb. Obviously, there's a few different technicalities within that, but that's a good guide to get started. Anyway, enough of the background rubbish. I've got through as much as I needed to there, and to be honest, I just made it through the boring stuff. Now let's figure out whether your VO2 max is any good or not. All right, so let's go. We can get rid of that rubbish with those notes. Anyway, so VO2 max norms. Is your VO2 max any good? Well, let's figure it out. So it's important to... So another little disclaimer here. It's important to point out that your VO2 max is expressed in either absolute or relative terms. Now, absolute, you probably won't see that much. It's not a very common way to portray your VO2 max. That's measured in liters per minute, but it doesn't really take into account, or that equation doesn't really take into account your body weight, so you probably won't see it as much. The common metric you'll see is your relative VO2 max. Now, this is expressed relative to your body weight and is generally given on that 0 to 90 or 100 scale. That's the common value that everybody knows. Now, this is measured as milliliters of oxygen consumed per kilo of body weight per minute. And I hope I got that right, but it's good enough, it's close enough. So now we'll start with the females first and give a bit of a guide as to a scale or norms of VO2 max. So as you can see, I'll put up a little bit of a graphic along the bottom here, and I'll sort of just talk through it. So this graph, essentially, or this table, shows different age groups for females, so from 20 all the way up to 60 plus, and how I've grouped them is from poor, average, good, and excellent. Now, you'll see a lot of different variation with these ranges, and this is just what I've collected over my research for this video. So there could be, you could go to 5 different sites and find 5 different values, and your Garmin watch might tell you another thing as well. So just keep that in mind. They're guides, or just to give you a bit of an indication as to where you're at. And obviously your VO2 max, your best VO2 max is after the product of consistent training as well. So always remember, you can always improve no matter where you might be rated at the moment. But I'll just go through the excellence. So 20 to 29 females, anything above 48 is pretty good. And then for 30 to 39, so we see that drop off again with aging as well. And that's what you'll notice as a pattern here. Anything greater than 44. 40 to 49, anything greater than 38. And then obviously as we get older and a bit more closer to a retirement home, I don't know whether you can say that, but I just did, you're getting above 30s is pretty good. So that's a bit of a scale where you're at. You can screenshot that or do whatever to compare where you're at. If you're at elite level, just for reference, so at elite level, or the best VO2 max for women, probably from about maybe 65 to high 70s. That's probably the range there. There might be a few people that sort of sneak up into that high 70 mark there. And again, that's your typical distance runners, cross-country athletes, skiers, cyclists, all the long-distance events that require aerobic energy. Now, we'll finish off with the men here. So this is, again, a similar table as you can see on the screen now. Men, as I've alluded to before, they have a great potential to reach a higher VO2 max. However, ladies can obviously improve theirs to a point greater than men, regardless of any of that. So as you'll see straight off, the men higher, so 20 to 29, anything excellent is above 59. You could probably maybe bump that down to 50, anything above 55 as well. But again, depends where you look. Depends where you look to see whether you're any good or not with VO2 max rating scales, because you can find them anywhere over the internet. And then again, as we get older, 30 to 39, we see it's greater than 54, we'll get you excellent. And then when we move to, say, 50 to 59, anything greater than 43. So obviously there is that decline, and training will help slow that decline as well, which is an important point. It might be something for a later video. And again, for elite males, historically, they can get very high VO2 maxes. So we've seen numerous instances of athletes getting 80s and into 90s as well for VO2 max. And again, it's your typical standard performers of distance athletes. So distance runners, cyclists, triathletes, cross-country skiers, or skiers in particular, and cyclists and marathon runners. They're probably your top VO2 max getters there. But there you have it. So that's about it. That's all I got for you. So hopefully you've identified where your VO2 max is on that scale. And as I said, there might be a bit of variation compared to what you used to, but if you don't like it, I'm sure you could find another scale that would tell you you're going better than what mine does. So I think it's important that if you know your VO2 max and you try and improve it and better yourself, because that's always a good mindset to have. So in the next video, I might go through, or probably will go through, how to improve your VO2 max, because that's an important stepping stone from here, and some of the fundamental training principles you need to incorporate within your program to see a boost in your VO2 max that will hopefully get you from good to excellent on my scale. But that's all we've got time for today, so I appreciate you tuning in. If you've got any value out of today's video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It would really mean a lot. Also, go check out some of the content from Damo and Sean. They've been doing plenty with the iPhone, so go have a look at that. But until next time, I'll see you later. So VO2 max is the product of cardiac output and the AVO2 diff, which is the AVO2 diff. Yeah, 20 to 30 is where your peak probably is for that. But having said that, we know that so the next one is training status. So this is an obvious one. Obviously, so the next one is training status. So the next one is training status. So the next one is training status. Now, this is an obvious one, of course. The more trained you are, or the more training you've done, then the higher your VO2 max, or the potential for it, of course. So next one is training status. Now, this is an obvious one, of course.